Welcome to Inputs to Action. I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin and excited to share a conversation with you today with Brian Fishbone, a longtime friend of mine. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. You're one of my most favorite people in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space.
Well, we share that same love and appreciation. And I should tell you, audience, that Brian is a longtime DEI practitioner. And I really came to know him because for a very long time, he hosted a gathering, a call for DEI practitioners where we got together, we shared experiences and learnings and asked questions, really an important early step in those kinds of platforms and connections. So Brian, you are appreciated and well known across DEI spaces. So we have appreciated you for a long time.
Thank you. And good point I should share with you. That community still exists on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to be connected to 180 other DE&I practitioners across the country, DM me on LinkedIn.
There you go. There, see, again, you continue to keep us together and keep us moving, which we appreciate. But our conversation today is still focused on inclusion, but in a different way. You have changed your working experience in a way that I think is really germane to what's happening today in business. And I'm knowing that, in our conversation, we're going to get to some really important insights for not only for employees, but for managers and just companies in general. So first of all, you've gone 100% virtual in your work.
I have.
Yes. So what was it that made you or led you, I should say, to this decision on focusing on remote work? What really inspired that decision for you?
Oh, I'm really happy to answer this question about what made me focus on remote work. And what I like to say, Lisa, is it's actually a trifecta. Okay, so there's three things. One, being laid off, and I'm going to tell you all the different parts of the story. Two, the pandemic. And three, my values and the values of my husband. So let's start first with the layoff. As you know, Lisa, I spent 2 decades living in the city of Philadelphia, loved it. It was home for me, but I was ready for the next challenge in my career and wanted to take, I hate saying take a stab. It sounds so dangerous. So I'll say I wanted to try leading the diversity, equity, and inclusion function for a small or medium-sized company because I had operated in large companies for a long time. And so my husband and I decided to move to San Francisco. And I worked for a tech company. Unfortunately, 8 months after I started working for them, what came in 2020? Your friend and mine, COVID-19, the pandemic. So imagine I'm laid off in San Francisco, one of the most expensive cities in the world, not a good city to be in without a job. That's one. And, layoffs force you to think a little bit about what you want to do next, right? Let's layer on the second part of the trifecta is the pandemic. So this is about 2 to 4 months into the pandemic. Everybody's already working remotely. Nobody can go into an office. So that's opening up my horizons a lot, right? I don't have to stay in San Francisco, which, by the way, I only moved out there for the job and had only been there 8 months. But really, thirdly, and most importantly, Lisa, is it was a values-based decision. And from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, I love being vulnerable because I feel like it leads the way for others to be vulnerable. I got way too much of my identity wrapped up in who I was professionally. It was taking up too much of my identity. And I decided, for a values-based decision, working remotely would allow me to have some distance, like almost like a boundary, physical when you think about it, between the office, right, and the employees in my work experience and who Brian Fishbone is as a broader person. So we actually moved away from San Francisco and I started doing contracting and consulting fully remotely. And I'm continuing to do it to this day. I do it under my consultancy, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion on Demand, DE&I on Demand. And I love it. And can I tell you something, Lisa? The most mentally healthy I've been in my whole career, and that's coming up on 25 years.
Wow. That, I mean, it says so much. And just as you're describing that, I can so appreciate that this really takes different forms for different people, because as you're describing, having that physical boundary between you and the office, and sort of kind of giving space to really think about who Brian Fishbone is in the broader sense, not just the context of the building and the office that you're going to. And for some, they have a hard time separating themselves when they're working from home. So because they have a hard time setting that boundary. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned in doing this? How are you making working from home work for you so that you are more fully who you are and not caught up in you never turn it off?
You know what? This is so funny, Lisa, right? Because I just got done telling you about the importance of boundaries, right?
Yeah.
I think you also have to have the boundaries in the home office too, right? Yeah. You, me, and so many others, we love the 30-second commute, right? Throwing on those sweatpants, walking across the hall, in my case to the guest bedroom, and starting work.
Yeah.
But this can be a trap too, right? You can be always on all the time because work is always there. It's with you in your house.
Right.
So you may have been thinking earlier when I gave this response, and your listeners might be thinking this, geez, the office offered me a boundary and now that's gone.
Right.
But for me, setting boundaries at home is important too.
Yeah.
And the physical distance between me and the job has really helped. And the number one way that I do this is I make sure when the clock strikes 5 or 6, whenever I've worked a healthy amount and delivered outcomes, not number of hours, I walk away.
Okay.
Brian, put the laptop down and turn it off.
Okay.
I even have this fun way that I think about it. You know, the Cinderella story, right?
Yes.
So this is my spare bedroom and my office at the same time, right?
Right.
So I tell myself in my head between 5 and 6 o'clock, the spare office, just like at midnight with Cinderella, is going to turn into a pumpkin.
Right.
So here's how this works, right? During the day, it is my office.
Yeah.
But come 5 or 6 o'clock, it's like midnight in Cinderella.
Yeah.
It's going to turn back into a spare bedroom. And the way that I do that is I make sure after I immediately turn off the laptop for the night that I do something personal in this.
Okay.
So I might do some of my back exercises. I might listen to a podcast like one from my favorite friend, Dr. Lisa Toppin, or even just watch some television.
Yeah.
And now I understand, okay, I'm in the pumpkin now.
Yeah.
And you know what? It'll turn back into an office tomorrow morning.
Right.
And all that work will be there for me in the morning. So to summarize, it's about boundaries.
Yes. Oh, I love that description. And I love the practice that you've put around it, doing something personal that denotes this is now a pumpkin that includes a bedroom. And that's what I'm doing. I'm operating in the bedroom. That's a great.
And sometimes my husband, John, has to get in here. This can't be my office 24/7.
Right. That's right. Right. And so, yes, he's got to use the space too. So you can't. Right. I love that. Okay. Well, that's huge. That's huge. And I'm wondering, so it kind of brings me to this question around companies, because companies are continuing to try to sort this out. I think many have sort of landed and said, hey, we're going to do some form of hybrid work, like sometimes in the office, sometimes not, or trying to just sort through what that looks like. So what are your observations about how to do it well from an employer perspective? What kinds of things do you think employers should consider? Because I think a lot of employers are struggling with this.
They are struggling. And thank you for asking me this question, Lisa, because now I can get on my soapbox. You follow me on LinkedIn and you know I'm passionate about this. I am passionate about the intersection of remote work and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first piece of advice that I give to companies, or the ones that I'm seeing that are doing it really well, 3 words: lead with remote. Hey, in my opinion, I think you should be focused on getting the best, most diverse talent. And guess what? The pandemic has actually provided you with the diverse talent play of the century, because you can hire people from anywhere in the world. They don't have to be an hour or 2-hour commute from your office. So I think leading with remote is important because it's about the outcomes and results that your people provide, not where they're based and not the number of hours that they work. So I'm a big fan of letting employees decide. So for some of them, 100% remote work is great. And and the way I can tell companies is, if an employee wants 100% work, that's you saying to them, we love you wherever you are. Some employees like hybrid work.
Right.
Okay. In my opinion, that's the company saying, you do you. That's great.
Right.
We'd love to see you a few days a week if that's what you want. And if you want to be at home a few days a week, we'll see you on the video conference.
Right.
And then finally, I think they get left out sometimes of this conversation. There are people that want to spend the 40 full hours a week in the office. They want the distance. They want the boundary. Maybe they're dealing with something hectic at home and they need the space.
Right.
Hey, that's okay. I make a little joke about it too. I say, hey, if you want to come into our cubicles every day and enjoy our cafeteria food, please come in every day.
Right.
So when I say lead with remote, I think the way companies are doing this best, the companies that are really embracing this, are saying work whenever, wherever, and however you want to. We're just concerned about creating an environment of inclusion and belonging and letting you unleash your full potential, wherever that is.
Yeah. Oh, that's good, Brian. That's good. And I think you've articulated the exactly the challenge and a really good lens on how you can think about and approach that. I think I love do you, we love you wherever you are. Really good lenses. And if you really do love our cubicles and our cafeteria, and some people really do have they got some good cafeterias.
That's right.
But to your point, that we go tongue in cheek, but to your point, there's some that really do need that daily human interaction. I mean, that was one of the things that I learned in the pandemic was how much people depended on the relationship and the exchange from the people at work, because they didn't live with anyone. And so they spent months and months alone. And so being in the office really served a bigger need than just sort of the work, so to speak. So each one of us has a different scenario. And I think you've described the 3 sort of options in a really real way. So, and you kind of hit on this, but I'm wondering, and let's hit it again just for a good measure. So one of the things that managers worry about is they're scared that they lose, I'm going to say, that connectivity and the magic when people are dispersed, right? I've heard managers say, look, we want everybody to be here, because we want the water cooler talk. We think that there's value in the water cooler talk, and we don't have that and don't know how to recreate that. And so, that's too much to lose, so to speak. So what do you say about that?
I say, guess what, great leaders? The playbook hasn't changed. You just have to be more intentional about creating those spaces virtually.
Okay.
So one of the signature offers, one of the things I offer in my consultancy, and that I developed before the pandemic, before this was like the big issue, is how do you lead inclusively across the employee life cycle? So as you attract, select, onboard, develop, engage, retain your employees, how's the best way to do this? And you know what's interesting? It's just a collection of self-reflection questions and easy to implement techniques. I'm going to tell you a secret. They work offline as well as they work online. Okay, so they work physically in person and they work online virtually. I think you just have to be more intentional. So, for example, number one, what was one of the number one things we all used to do to bond together in the office? The happy hour.
Right.
You know, and interestingly enough, from an inclusion standpoint, those were never great for people who don't drink alcohol.
Right.
So here's the thing.
People who had obligations right after work.
Thank you. Right. But you used a really good analogy around the water cooler, right? So how do you create the water cooler? With intention.
Yeah.
Some of the best managers that I've seen put aside 30 minutes or 60 minutes during the week, and it is the online virtual hangout. It's a no business space. Well, if you start talking about the business, fine, if that's what you want to talk about. But the whole team gets together, and it's just time for them to chill out. And they could feel comfortable removing their virtual backgrounds and just showing you who they are, especially if it's a fully virtual team, right? And just spending good time together. Actually, that's a better investment in inclusion than hoping and praying they'll talk to each other at the water cooler.
Yeah.
It's intentionality, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, one of my favorite practices from that toolbook that I told you about.
Yeah.
Number one way to make people feel more included and feel like they belong on your team is do what I call an inventory. Who are you spending the most time with on your team? And who do you know the most about? Oftentimes, unfortunately, it is the people like you.
Right.
So what I encourage my clients to do and what I encourage their leaders to do is to take a step back and do an inventory. Think about how much time each week I'm spending with each employee and how much do I know about them? I'll bet when you do that, how much I know about them column, there are going to be some you could write a paragraph about outside of work. And there's some you won't even be able to come up with a sentence.
Right.
And then you know what I say with respect to intentionality? Close the gap.
Yeah.
You write an action plan about how am I going to get to know Beth better and spend more time with her? You know, and maybe I need to spend a little less time with Mort, who I know a lot about.
Right.
So I think to summarize this question, when I hear this question from leaders, I think it's just it's an evolution of the skills. They're not new skills. You just have to adapt and be more intentional. Ooh, I want to address one more with you.
Okay.
That kind of gets under my skin.
All kinds of good stuff. Keep going.
Right. That gets under my skin. Number one that we get from, I'll be honest, older, socioeconomically privileged CEOs. What about the junior employees? How are they going to get mentorship? How are they going to grow in their career if we're virtual? Intentionality. You can design a mentorship program that's fully online. And in fact, that way people will be able to be mentored by people in other locations. You're not limited to the one physical location where your employees are.
Yeah.
And for some people, that type of relationship building is actually easier by a virtual conference. Great friend of mine who co-leads the community of practice we were talking about earlier. You know, she does manages employee resource groups at, I'm hinting to you, one of the largest companies in the world.
Okay.
And, you know, and she said she remembers meeting with the CEO.
Okay.
Video conference during the pandemic. And how nervous she would have been if that was in a conference room. She got great mentorship because they were both in their home elements, right? And they were freer to talk a little bit about what makes them tick. Oh, so it turns out people actually can get mentorship maybe even more effectively in the virtual space. But you know me, I could go on for hours about this, Lisa, so I'll stop right there.
Well, I mean, really, you've dropped such important wisdom around this, and just very practical, accessible ideas for managers to implement, because people are struggling with this. It's such a paradigm shift. And so if I think what you've offered is some ways in which you can kind of lean into a different way of doing it, accepting that the way it has been done might not be available to you in the same way. So I'm appreciating very much what you've offered. Yeah.
I love that you just used leaning into it. You just reminded me of something really important.
Okay.
When leaders get scared, do you know where that fear is really coming from? Loss of control, perceived loss of control.
That's right. That's right.
And you know what's really interesting? In my mental health journey, I found out some of the best learning and growth for me has actually happened when I've let go.
Right.
And tried to control less.
Yeah.
And allowing your people to work whenever, however, and wherever they want gives you the opportunity to try new things. And I'm betting you're probably going to get even more out of your people by letting them choose. But you have to let go of control a little bit. And that's so hard for us, right? Yeah. When you think about it, when you think of the corporation, right?
Yeah.
It's the building, the cubicles. I can walk around and see if you're working.
Right. I always laugh about that because, I certainly grew up in corporate at a time where people did sort of focus in on whether or not you were working and how late you stayed and those kinds of things. And as things evolved, I thought, well, you're walking past a person's cubicle or office and you're determining that they're working, but they could be shopping online. Like, it doesn't, just because they're physically there doesn't mean that they're physically there. So, so it is just it's a paradigm shift in terms of how we see our role in leading, and then really how we're deciding to engage. But I love what you're saying. You gotta let go.
And you know what? One more from an inclusion standpoint. One more. This has been a godsend when you lead with remote, and really, nobody likes to talk about the benefits of the pandemic, but in the workplace, there have been some. This has been a godsend for inclusion with respect to caregivers. How much weight is off of their shoulders now by not having to commute 2 hours to your office,
right,
and have to make excuses about taking mom to a doctor's visit, or going to the kids' softball game or their drama club play.
Right.
This has been game-changing. Why wouldn't you want to offer that to your employees every day, especially your caregivers, if that's what they need?
Yeah. And I think the acknowledgement that in some way, shape or form, so many of us are absolutely doing some caregiving. And for a time, I was sandwiched, of course, with parents as well as children.
I remember.
Yeah. So this does create a new level of flexibility and just gives a little bit of room. It doesn't eliminate the heavy burden that caregivers have, but it does help just by eliminating the drive time. That's so significant, right? I mean, and the stress of the drive time. So real solutions here, my friend. You are excellent. I'm wondering, just and you've kind of talked about this in terms of from a DEI perspective, and the idea that we can include people from a virtual environment that, in ways that we couldn't before. Do you see any ways in which this has hampered that at all, or is it all systems go, really, from your perspective?
Oh, I think it's actually helped improve inclusion and the sense of belonging.
Okay.
I will tell you, my colleagues of color from historically marginalized groups and underrepresented groups have talked to me, and I've read research studies about how much of a weight is lifted off of their shoulder without having to be presented with microaggressions at work. Hey, these can still happen on the camera.
Sure.
I'm not saying that they don't.
Right.
But I had one friend talk to me about African-American female friend talked to me about what a relief it is now. Nobody asks me if they can touch my hair.
Right. Right.
That's really powerful, right?
Yeah.
And, and I just have heard so many different examples of this. Another was from a good friend of mine, Latinx man, saying a big weight is lifted off my shoulders, not sitting in a conference room and being the only one who looks like me.
Right. Right. It's
different on video.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't even have to have your video on all of the time, right?
Right.
And
and that's true. Yeah.
And don't take my word from it from anecdotally, from me talking to my friends. There's plenty of research out there, plenty of surveys that have been done that show that diverse talent that you're trying so hard to recruit, engage, develop, and retain.
Yeah.
They actually don't want to be mandated back into your office.
Right.
They don't want it, and they're willing to leave. By the way, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite organizations right now who's really nailing this is the Institute for Corporate Productivity, I4CP.
I know I4CP. Yes.
So look them up, i4cp.com. I have great friends that work there. They're doing some great research on the future of work. And they're telling it like it is.
Yeah.
Like really stripping away these myths and how you overcome them, right? Like you were talking about the leaders worry. Well, how can we really be inclusive if we're dispersed? They're answering the questions about that.
Yeah.
So, I think it's improved diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Talk to your friends who are different than you. Look at the research.
Yeah.
And you'll see leading with remote, letting people work wherever, however, and whenever they want is your DEI and B play of the century. Wow. Mic drop.
Yeah. Boom goes the dynamite. I love that, Brian. That's no, but you're right. I mean, it really does open it up in a way that we have not seen in years. We've been so hamstrung around location and zip code and and depending upon the industry, people are going to decide where they're going to move, where they're safe to move. There's lots of considerations that virtual working opens up.
And I want to add real quickly, it is a wonderful opportunity. Everybody wins, the employee and the employer. I'll tell a quick story that's going to sound very familiar to you, Dr. Lisa Toppin.
Okay.
During the pandemic, when I started doing contracting and consulting work, full-time remotely, I actually engaged with a Southeastern United States-based grocery store chain. They needed someone to really help them think more strategically about their employee resource groups. I'm talking about amping up the strategic impact, better infrastructure, better org charts. Pre-pandemic, pre-fully remote work, I never could have done that work for them because they required people to be in the office.
Right.
So it's really wonderful. I got some really great professional development. They got the talent and experience that they needed. And get this, I never set foot in one of their supermarkets in the whole 18-month contract.
Wow.
Not once.
Right.
It didn't matter. They needed my knowledge and my skills, and that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
And to our listeners out there, the reason I said Dr. Lisa Toppin will know about this is because she helped me get that gig. So thank you, Lisa.
Happy to. I'm so glad it worked for both of you. So that was a good outcome. And I have just so that we complete the story, because you and I go together. I have been in the stores, so it all worked out.
Yes, right.
I went in proxy for you.
Oh,
so
good.
It all worked out. It all worked out. Okay, so here's a question. What would you say you've learned about yourself and how you work and your effectiveness? You're clear that you want to work virtually. You've kind of tested it. You've worked that out, and are having success from it. But what have you learned about yourself, maybe that you were less familiar with or did not know before?
It's going to sound strange to some people, but there's so much more to Brian Fishbone than his work. And it's so funny because a lot of the people that I've dealt with over the years, the thousands of ERG volunteers, HR colleagues that I've had, community of practice folks, they think I am one of the most folksy and authentic people and bring my whole self to work, right?
Yeah.
But like I told you earlier, it was taking up too much of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's problematic. I will never forget, may he rest in peace, Bob Moad, who created this series of training courses called Increasing Human Effectiveness. They were all the rage in the 2000s.
Okay.
I know I just dated myself, but I know I have a young face, so it's okay. You know, and like all the big companies used it. And, you know, one of the quotes he always invoked was, and I want to get it right because I always reverse it when I say it out loud. If you are what you do, then when you don't, you aren't. That's dangerous.
That is, yeah. Yeah.
I would get so wrapped up in my professional identity. And this remote work, these 2 years have really allowed me to keep some distance from my work and really come into who I am outside of work.
Yeah.
And to continue to be vulnerable. I mentioned this a little earlier.
Yeah.
It's been great for my mental health.
So glad.
Because how many people who struggle with anxiety, depression, or some other condition had to go into the office day after day and fake it to make it?
Yep.
Do you know I could be having the worst possible day, like lowest with depression and anxiety, and people would pass me in the hall. How you doing, Brian? I'm outstanding today. Do you know how much cognitive dissonance that took?
Yeah.
Because that was my professional identity.
Yeah.
It couldn't be changed, right?
Yeah.
So it's allowed me to have a little bit more space with who Brian Fishbone is. And it's almost integrated the different parts of my identity too, which I really like, right? You know, it's so easy now when the doorbell rings and the dog goes hysterical. I'm allowed to say in a meeting or a one-on-one with my manager, hey, can you hold on just a minute? I have to go get the door.
Right.
And they know about receiving a package. They know that when the dog barks or something's up or the kids need something.
Yeah.
That has been so good for me.
Yeah.
So healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's been great for all of us. I've appreciated seeing babies and dogs and young people walking through and, you know, just because you really do get to see the whole person. And I guess at least for a person like me, I have great value for that. I do really want to see your whole person, your whole life.
And it's a great way that leaders can lead by example. I talked about how the toolbook hasn't changed for great leaders.
Yeah.
What a great way for you to lead by example, right?
That's right.
For example, control, right?
Right.
Some people are very worried about staying green on Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Teams, Slack, whatever you use.
Yeah.
Always available, right?
Right.
But as a leader now in a remote first environment, you have an opportunity to lead by example.
Right.
They can actually see you taking a break or attending to a personal issue or emergency in real time.
Right.
And that's powerful. And it sends them a signal of inclusion and belonging that says, hey, you know, when it's your turn or when something like this happens to you, I got your back.
Yep.
And we're the same. We're very similar.
No, you're exactly right. I have a colleague now who, when her kids come through and they're leaving, and they always greet her and give her a kiss goodbye. And, you know, she will interrupt the meeting, doesn't matter who's on it, to say goodbye and kiss them and tell them she loves them. And, you know, so you get to see that intimate side of her that you otherwise would never see, and appreciate that the person you're working with is a person that, you know, has people who really love and care about her more than just those of us who are working with her right now. Like the extension of that is meaningful. And I think the same. I mean, I've been, you know, completely, you know, engaged with kids and picking up from school and doing all the things while, you know, colleagues are listening to me do that. So it really changes the game.
And I love your example about the person who stops the meeting for the kiss goodbye from your children. This is a perfect example about how remote work has evolved, about how we think about work and what part of our identity is.
Yeah.
God forbid that should be the last time she sees her child. And you know what? She got to kiss them.
Yep.
And say goodbye in a way that could never happen in the office. It sounds depressing and sad, but those are the kinds of values decisions that we make and that we're freer to make.
Yes.
And it's not just virtual work. When you keep hearing me say this, I'm doing the drip, drip, drip. I was a corporate trainer and I'm a teacher at heart. This is what happens when you let your employees work whenever, however, and wherever they want to.
Yeah.
They make better decisions.
Yeah. No, that's so good, Brian. I hear the drip, drip, drip. You are delivering that with excellence, my friend. So here's the deal. This is inputs to action. And what you've given us today is great input on so many levels, so many good examples and just rich nuggets to take. What we ask our guests, now that we have all of this great input, I'm going to ask you to point us now to an action. This is the name of our podcast, Inputs to Action. So what do you advise employees who are working virtually? What do you advise them to do? And what do you advise employers who have employees working virtually to do? Are there some immediate things that you would advise both of those groups to do and or consider?
Absolutely. I'll start with employees, and I've got two for them. And they're not going to be a surprise because I've already talked about them. First, set boundaries.
Yeah.
It is so easy when you work fully remote, or maybe you're only working remote 2 days a week. That laptop, that phone sits right in that spare bedroom 30 seconds away from you, right? Mm-hmm. And for your own health, you have to be able to draw a line there. Yes, it allows you flexibility, right? You can come back to your work after your children or whoever you're giving care for goes to sleep. Hey, I want you to work whenever, however, and wherever you want to work. But you still have to set boundaries because it's so easy when it's just 30 seconds away and you don't have to put on a dress shirt to just keep going back to your work.
Right.
Second one for employees, please have some grace for yourself, your coworkers, and your manager.
Mm-hmm.
This is not always going to go well. People stumble. We're human. Don't forget the common humanity. We all made mistakes in the office.
Right.
Just because somebody makes a mistake one time doesn't mean we should throw away remote and hybrid work.
Right. Okay, great.
Now, you asked me for employers.
Yes.
And leaders specifically. I'm talking to people leaders.
Yes.
Here. I think I hit on this a little bit, normalizing self-care for your employees. It's kind of the reverse of the set boundaries on the employee side. And I think you can do that through storytelling and behavior modeling. I gave some examples earlier in the call, but one of my favorites that I saw a leader do, which I love, is, he told the team on a virtual session, throughout the day, I take micro naps. Hello, you're living in, this is a spare bedroom. I got a bed behind me. And my dog.
And a dog.
And dog. He told this story about, if I'm overtired, I can take an hour nap and just keep working. It is about, and here's the other lesson for the employers. It was never about the number of hours worked or how much time you spent in the office. The true measure of the impact that a company has with respect to its people is in the results. It's in the outcomes and it's in the impact. Never was it in the number of hours. And leaders and companies, it's so hard to let go of control, isn't it?
Right.
How am I going to know they're productive?
Yeah.
They are. And guess what? You didn't always know they were productive at work, right? Given your example, right? Lisa, you could have been online shopping, but it looks like you're super busy at the computer.
That's right. Well, you're going to know about the productivity from the results, the impact, and the outcomes. That's what you're saying.
So it's another example of how the playbook hasn't changed, right? You're still setting goals with your employees and holding them accountable, setting realistic goals.
Right.
Wow. Brain surgery, right?
Right. Not.
I'm trying to think if there was something else I wanted to share.
Yeah.
No, I think that was the big part, was the impact, outcomes, and results matter most, not where the person is working, how the person is working, or when they are working.
I love it. Love it. Well, you've hit it perfectly. What great input and direction for action. And so, Brian, this has been delightful. We've got to find another topic to talk about, because I love talking with you. You're so great and full of such great wisdom. So thank you for sharing today.
And I love talking with you. And one of the things I always tell people is I'm at my best when I'm helping other people do, be, and feel better. So I thank you for giving me a platform to do that.
Well, my platform is your platform anytime. And that is sort of, if I think about your brand, that is absolutely the essence of who you are, is committed to helping people. And you do it with such ease and such grace and such genuine interest and love, really. So I just appreciate that so much about you. I really, really do.
Thank
you. All right, friends. Brian and I, we could go on forever. We could, because we have that kind of mutual respect, appreciation, and love for each other. But this is the end of this episode of Inputs to Action. So I thank you for joining, and I'll look forward to you joining us next time. I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, audience. Talk to you again.